Shabbat Shalom and Shana Tova. When the great Israel Baal Shem Tov saw misfortune threatening the Jews, it was his custom to go into a certain part of the forest to meditate. There he would light a fire, say a special prayer, and the miracle would be accomplished and the misfortune averted. Later, when his disciple, the celebrated Maggid of Mezrich, had occasion for the same reason to intercede with heaven, he would go to that same place in the forest and say, "Master of the universe, listen. I do not know how to light the fire, but I am still able to say the prayer, and again, the miracle would be accomplished." Still later, you might know the story, Moshe Leib of Sasov, in order to save his people once more, would go into the forest and say, "I do not know how to light the fire. I do not know the prayer, but I know the place, and this must be sufficient." It was sufficient, and the miracle was accomplished. And then it fell to Israel a vision to overcome misfortune. Sitting in his armchair, his head in his hands, he spoke to God. "I am unable to light the fire, and I do not know the prayer. I cannot even find the place in the forest. All I can do is tell the story, and this must be sufficient." And it was sufficient. While we are not Hasidic Rebbes of old, we too are burdened and have a desire to overcome our personal and communal misfortune. I don't know whether we expect a miracle, but I am sure some of us at least hope that God will answer just that one prayer that we have this year. It seems we return year after year to the sanctuary, and no year have we ever said, "Wow, what a fantastic year." So I'm right in that. It feels that way. At least in all the how many years I've been around here, that's not been the case. As the years progress and I get older, as we all get older, the grim realities of the world are heavy. Climate change and its ravaging devastation, which we saw so profoundly this week in Morocco and in Libya. The slow or sometimes quick death of democracy here in Israel and around the world. The migrant crisis, which is profoundly affecting our city, our neighborhood. There's unlimited access to guns in this country, and we have an epidemic, a cancer really, of gun violence. We still have COVID, and we have a major mental health crisis on our hands, particularly with the young. And when I look out at our kahal here, and it's just, again, we don't take for granted having a full sanctuary. Some of us are masked, of course, but just to see the faces of all of us here together, and I know those who are joining us on the live stream and in Zoom, and of course we have a big kahal at 86th Street and at Jazz. But we also carry so much pain. There's illness and there's loss. There's children of ours who are not launching, which seems to be very particular to this time. People are having marital troubles. There are loneliness struggles, and on and on and on. The state of being a human is hard. It's true there is good news, and there is plenty to be grateful for, and I feel that way also when I look out into the kahal. There are many smachot, many people who have reached very beautiful occasions in their life. But we don't only come to this sanctuary to celebrate. We come to acknowledge the depth of the tragic gap between our personal and communal aspirations and the reality that we find ourselves in. For thousands of years, generations of our ancestors have faced crisis after crisis and searched for God and tried to understand the world, its joys and its pains. And what emerged from all that searching? Stories. Not stories that fit neatly together like a puzzle, but stories that have different questions and approaches, stories that contradict one another, stories that tie up neatly in a bow, and stories that leave us with hard questions. Stories like the one about the Hasidic Rabbis teach us that stories have power. They are transcendent. They carry a memory of the past, a question for the present, and a compass for the future. A story can feel as significant as the experience of the exact place in the forest with the fire and a special prayer. We, of course, have a deep attachment to text. The Jewish people are called the people of the book, after all. Throughout our exile, no matter where we were, it was the commitment to our story, to the Torah itself, that kept us going. We return to our story year after year. It is the locus of our religious experience. Our stories are learned and taught. They are followed and obeyed. They are questioned and interpreted. They are a mirror to our emotions and longings. They bestow value. They catalyze imagination, and they often birth new stories. And when I am feeling confused or burdened or in need of inspiration, I most often turn to the stories of our tradition to find my way. And so, this year, during these Yamim Noraim, Roli and I chose stories to share with you that we believe are essential to guide us in this complicated world, and to help us to find strength and hope, to ask hard questions and pursue new possibilities, to help us understand our own story and offer up a path to change. So let me share another one. Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the Rav of Northern White Russia, who died in 1813, was jailed in Petersburg. He was awaiting trial when the chief of the gendarmes entered his cell. The Rav was so deep in meditation that he did not notice his visitor at first. This suggested to the chief, who was a thoughtful person, what manner of man he had before him. He began to converse with his prisoner and brought up a number of questions which had occurred to him in reading the scriptures. Finally, he asked, "How are we to understand that God, the all-knowing, said to Adam, 'Where art thou, Ayeka?'" "Do you believe," answered the Rav, "that the scriptures are eternal and that every era, every generation, and every person is included in them?" "I believe this," said the other. "Well then," said the tzaddik, "in every era, God calls to every person, 'Where are you in your world? So many years and days of those allotted to you have passed, and how far have you gotten in your world?' God says something like this, 'You have lived 46 years. How far along are you?'" When the chief of the gendarmes heard his age mentioned, he pulled himself together, laid his hand on the Rav's shoulder, and cried, "Bravo!" But his heart trembled. This is a story told by Dr. Martin Buber, which is really a story about a story. The first story is about Adam and Chava, about Adam and Eve, upon being in the garden, when God calls out to them after they sin, "Ayeka, where are you?" The first question in the Torah. The chief of the gendarmes is bothered by the seeming contradiction in why an all-knowing God would have to ask the question, Where are you? After all, doesn't God know? The Rav responds on a completely different plane. He doesn't engage in the contradiction that the chief supposedly exposes. Instead, he channels God's eternal question, Ayeka, where are you? And directs it to the chief, making it personal, as if the chief were the biblical Adam. God doesn't ask the question because God needs to know, of course. God asks the question to call the human being to account, to penetrate the heart, to catalyze a search. It was the Rav who was about to stand trial, but it was the chief who was trembling. Was his life on the right path? Had his 46 years meant anything? What was he hiding from? It is the first question from the Torah, Ayeka, where are you? That is the central question of these Yamim Noraim, and in many ways, the orienting question of our lives. We can make ourselves busy and not answer it. We do a great job of that. We can hide from the truth of our existence. We can have an intellectual argument about God's nature. But what of the human being? What about us? As we will recite when we come to Ne'ilah at the end of these Yamim Noraim, Ma anu, ma chayenu. What are we and what is our life? This story puts the search at the center of the human experience and asks our life to be a response. In the rabbinic tradition, a question is called a kushia. You might have heard the idea, what's bothering Rashi? What's the kushia? What's bothering Rashi is that from the Hebrew word kasheh, meaning hardness or difficult, resistant. That's what a question does. In her book, The Particulars of Rapture, Dr. Aviva Zornberg writes, a true kushia, a true question, has some of the sublime. It disturbs order. It is limitless, terrifying, and yet it evokes its own pleasure, even of enthusiasm, without the capacity to ask, to open up the closed issues, to break through the obvious, the self-understood. There can be no meaningful narrative. Questions destabilize and provoke. They break things open. They disrupt the established order. Questioning is the beginning to finding our way, to writing a new story. There's that great moment in the movie Fiddler on the Roof, or the show, depending on when you saw it last. I don't know it in Yiddish. So when Tevye says, do you love me? And Goldie says, do I what? As the song progresses, what at first is the resistance, because she doesn't want to answer the question, right? The question of does she love him morphs into an acknowledgement of that love in the course of the song. At first she's like, no, that's not a question I want to have to answer. And then through the dialogue of the song, she comes to find an answer. Now that's the movies, but I can think of several times in the course of my own life when I have been asked a question by my parents or my kids, a teacher, a friend, or a therapist that stopped me in my tracks and then sent me searching for a response. A question is what sent me on the path to the rabbinate. A question made me decide to take a sabbatical 5 years ago. A question made me rethink some of my parenting decisions. And as a rabbi, I am often in the role of asking hard questions when someone is ill or facing death or dealing with strained relationships or questions of self-worth. It is a way to crack open a barrier or stasis. I also find that it's interesting when someone is sitting in my office, or now these days on Zoom, talking about a struggle with someone, if I ask, have you considered asking that person how they feel or what they need? It is the asking of the question that feels like the biggest risk for them. They are afraid to ask because they don't know if they want to push. And sometimes they don't know if they want the answer. But it is the question that opens up uncharted territory and paves the path for transformation or a breakthrough. We have our own personal kushiot, questions that we need to ask ourselves to push us out of the ordinary. What are the length of my days? In these, how many years? Substitute 46 for your own age. Where am I? Am I where I want to be? Am I in good relationships? Am I connected? Am I generous? Do I want to give more? You create the list. And we also have communal Jewish people kushiot, questions about Ayeka. Where are we as a Jewish people? And is the Judaism that we live, that we espouse to live up to the demands and the needs of the moment that we are in and for the next generation? And what are we willing to give up to let the next generation take the reins and birth a new version of Jewish life? We'll ask the third floor, which is where we have a 20s and 30s service. What do they need to have a Jewish life that's vibrant and relevant? And of course, there are the kushiot about Israel that for years the Jewish community suppressed because hard questions about Israel were considered a betrayal or were disloyal. And those that asked them, ourselves amongst them, were punished for asking. Look where we are today with this anti-democratic, hateful, Jewish supremacist government. What will our relationship with Israel be if all reasonableness is lost? Forget all the righteousness and moral commitment to its citizens and those under its occupation. Will we dare reconsider what the relationship of American Jews are to Israel and Zionism? Nothing will ever change if we aren't willing to ask hard questions. Now, there is also a liability in spending too much time on the questions and the search. Buber writes, "Heart searching is decisive only if it leads to the way. For there is a sterile kind of heart searching which leads to nothing but self-torture, despair, and deeper enmeshment. Sometimes we come with the same questions year after year, as if our story has been on rewind or replay." I don't know if people know those terms anymore because you don't need them, right? When you had a CD player or a tape recorder, rewind. We've become often a victim to our own questioning, so much so that we are consumed to the point of paralysis. True kushiot, true hard questions, are also not limitless. We live with restraints. Not everything is available to us. Sometimes we need to let go of certain things, mourn the things that we can't have or that we dreamed of that are not coming our way. We have to search within the life that is ours. Yes, we have dreams, but we also live in a reality and not a fantasy land. There are constraints. The goal of the question is not to remain in the search forever, but to actually land somewhere. At some point, our questions need to lead to a place of declaring who we want to be. What changes are we committed to making? What is most important to us? And what are we willing to do to live a life that expresses that answer? To build or renew our Sefer HaChaim, the story of our lives. Many years ago, it's many years ago at this point, I fell in love with an essay by Chaim Nachman Bialik that makes a deep connection between Agadah and Halakha, story and law, and it's called that, Halakha and Agadah. We often juxtapose story and law, particularly in the tradition. The stories of our tradition are lovable and enchanting, if not engaging. The law, the halakha, is rigid and dry and rote. And the essay opens up in this way. For the halakha, a frown. For the agadah, a smile. The one is strict, harsh, unyielding as iron, the quality of justice. The other is permissive, softer than oil, the quality of mercy. The one, the shell, the body, the act. The other, the interior, the soul, the intent. Here is cemented orthodoxy, obligation, indenture. There is a continual renewal, freedom, permission. Bialik makes the case that the stories of our tradition are the soul actually behind the law. All the stories about the power of Shabbat, for instance, are what create the list of stringencies of how we celebrate Shabbat. For instance, the 39 malachot, the 39 prohibitions of work on Shabbat, which are all the no-nos. You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't blow the shofar, you could say, are drawn out of the story of the building of the Mishkan. Every act of work that was done in the creation of the building Mishkan then becomes a law of the things that you can't do on Shabbat. The story, the Shabbat is a bride, wear white, sing, dance, have festive meals, make love. On a completely other note, my bubby had a superstition that things should never start on a Monday. Did anyone grow up with that superstition? She was special. Things can't start on a Monday. It makes the work week kind of hard. And I was scheduled to be born on April 26th. My mom had the calendar out, and when she left the doctor's office, because I was a C-section, my brother too, she realized that the April 26th was a Monday. At which point, I'm sure she began to sweat profusely. And she went back into the doctor's office and quickly changed the appointment to a Tuesday to appease my bubby, Zichrona Livracha. She was full of Baba Meisters. But it turns out, actually, that there's a reason why she believed there was a grounding in the reason why you shouldn't start things on a Monday. Because in the first day of creation in the Torah, it doesn't say it's good. If you look in the Torah, it doesn't say it's good on the first day of creation. Now, my bubby didn't know that part. She just accumulated reams and reams of superstitions. But that was the origin of the superstition, that the Torah didn't say it was good on a Monday. Now, if you think about it, then that would be Sunday you shouldn't start things on, right? In the Jewish calendar, but in a secular calendar, it's a Monday. Stories birth laws, and sometimes superstitions. And Bialik tells us that stories and law are of the same substance, just different forms. One is water, that's the story, and the other is ice. That's the law. He writes, the halakha and agadah, the law and story, are not in fact anything except two halves of the same whole, two faces of the same creature. The connection between the two of them is like that from speech to thought and feeling, or from action and tangible form to speech. The halakha, the law, is the crystallization, the final and inevitable result of the agadah. The agadah is the core of the halakha. Agadah, the story, is the plaintive voice of the heart's yearning as it wings its way to its haven. Halakha is the resting place, place where for a moment the yearning is satisfied and stilled. And of course, he says, the process begins again. Then the halakha, the law, becomes the mother of a new agadah, of a new story. We too are in an agadah halakha cycle. We arrive on these Yamim Noraim to look at the story of the past year, the stories of our life up until this moment. Ayaka, where are we? Underneath the chapters of our lives that have already been written and crystallized is the very essence of who we are. Each and every one of us are unique souls filled with the desire for a life of meaning and purpose, a life that makes a difference, a life that is not on automatic pilot, a life of creativity and imagination, love and generosity that pursues justice and dignity. There's a story that has yet to be told. And in these precious days, we have the freedom and permission to reflect and review, to ask hard questions, ask kushiot, ask for forgiveness, and write a new chapter, a new agadah, and then walk the talk, the new halakha. Unlike the Baal Shem Tov, we did not go to that certain place in the forest, but we have come to this certain place. And we have a machzor filled with the same very special prayers year after year. Hopefully, we come with a fire lit in our souls and a heart that yearns to ask hard questions and search in the midst of our misfortunes and our blessings. Might we have a new or renewed story to write? Now that story would be sufficient. Dayenu, maybe even a miracle.